Hey, hey, all right. We are back for another episode of the Music Equity Chat Show. This is a show for music educators to go beyond the surface, to have deeper conversations about how we can reimagine our music education space to be diverse, inclusive, and culturally responsive for all of our students. I'm Ashley Cuthbertson, and I'm the host of the Music Equity Chat Show. I'm a music educator and also the founder and principal consultant of Cuthbertson Consulting. We are a full service educational consulting company that specifically supports music educators in centering equitable and culturally responsive practices in their curriculum and instruction so that they can build and maintain high quality music programs where all of our young musicians are thriving. And I'm so excited for our episode tonight. We're going to be talking about centering a culturally responsive approach in music education. So perfect for this show. And we are going to be talking to Liz Palmer. So, hey, Liz, thank you so much for joining me this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate
Awesome.
me being here.
Yeah, awesome. I'm so glad that you are here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to let you go ahead and tell the people all about you, Liz.
All right. My name is Liz Palmer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a music educator. I have about 10 years of experience in K-12 education. I'm an adjunct professor at University of Maryland in Baltimore County, teaching secondary instrumental methods, as well as a residential college coordinator at the University of Southern California, where I oversee a continuing student community. So I'm I am bi-coastal. I got my feet in both types of education, so more of the administrative side, but also in the classroom as well. I study uh, social justice and music education, as well as culturally relevant and responsive music teaching. And so I was kind of led to that just through the way things have just kind of unfolded, and the way that my thinking has kind of where it's been for the last several years. So I was just happy to be able to share a little bit of what I know, what I've discovered, and the framework that me and my team have developed.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And so Liz and I actually connected. Oh, actually, I guess we connected like twice, right? Like the very first time we didn't even realize like who each other were because we have a
Right.
mutual friend in PG County. Shout out to our PG County folks. And we were at like a backyard party and didn't even realize like
Yeah.
who each other were. I'm pretty sure like we were in a whole conversation like
Yeah.
years ago before the pandemic. And then we reconnected because as I am wont to do, I find people on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram that I think are interesting and I connect with them. And I saw Liz, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. From time to time, I slide through there and teach classes. And so I saw that Liz and I both have that connection. And so I made a point to go to your session at the NAFME conference in November in National Harbor. And as you were talking, and I think I told you this, I was like, man, she looks like super familiar, but I couldn't like place you right away. And then it hit me like, I'm pretty sure she was at one of those parties at our mutual friend's house. And so I
Yeah.
actually texted him during the session. I was like, do you know Liz Palmer? And he was like, yeah, and so do you, because she was at my house like all those years ago before we were talking to her. So a funny happenstance of us like crossing, two different times, and how like much of an interesting, not coincidence, but such an interesting thing that the framework that you and your research team has come across and found from the work and the data that you're doing basically mirrors the framework that I created from my time in the classroom, from my time working with music educators across the country and internationally. So I'm loving that there's that research
Yeah.
to really I mean, I already knew it because it's just my lived experience, but I'm so
Mm-hmm.
excited that because there's not a lot of research specifically in music ed around this. And
Yeah,
so
for
I was
sure.
like excited to see that there's being actual research to back up the work that I found.
And that's so true. Like I went to your session the very next day, and I was pretty blown away. Like there was so much alignment between the theoretical and the practical, and that was our goal, was to create something that was practical, but also had some research grounding and other lessons that we knew would be important for music teachers to consider. And it was just like it was kismet.
Yeah,
So
it really was.
yeah, so it's been great just connecting with you on the work. And so yeah, it's just so excited about what the future has for cultural relevance, especially in the music space, because in our lit review, when we were studying this, we were like, oh, there's been 40 years of research or, different iterations of culturally relevant teaching, but only in the last 8 years or 10 years at this point has it really entered the music education space. And that was a very limited, a very slim amount of research at that. So it's nice to know that there's alignment and connection.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I see we got quite a few watchers of our show tonight. So hey, shout out to Dr. Tangi Reed Marshall. Dr. Tangi Reed just published a book also, so we'll have to make sure we check out her book. I just ordered it on Amazon, Dr. Tangi, so I'm excited to get it in. And I'm sure there's other folks. Yeah, her book is fantastic. She did a virtual launch party last week, which was great. And any other folks that are watching live, feel free to join us in the comments. I can't always comment back, I'm realizing, but I can definitely shout you out verbally. So I see Dr. Tangi is with us, and anyone else that's with us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, feel free to let us know. We can see that you are with us. Awesome. All right. So Liz, you told us just a little bit about the work that you're doing, but I would love to hear kind of like the story of what led you to the work that you are doing now. Whether you want to share like all the way back from your PG County days or just kind of where you are right now. I'd love for the people to hear a little bit more about like the story that led you to being so deep into this work around culturally responsive and relevant teaching in the music education space.
For sure. So the real story happened, right in 2020, like July 2020 or so. But there was always a connection to social justice. So, when I was working on my doctorate at USC, I would always write about topics that had close relationship between music and sociology, social justice, and curriculum being one of those things. And so culturally relevant teaching was something that I briefly mentioned in an article that was published in 2018. And so I always knew what it was, and I understood what it was. And so fast forward to 2020, we were hit with the pandemic. We were hit with the video of George Floyd being murdered. We found out about Breonna Taylor. We saw so much more, not to mention going back to 2014 when Michael Brown was killed. Sandra Bland and all these folks that were just living, and then one day they weren't. And you can't tell me that their skin color had nothing to do with it. The presumed threat of our Blackness didn't have anything to do with them being murdered, right? So no one's ever going to be able to convince me that was not a reason why these people were killed. And so 2020, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and I had a stroke. I was in the hospital for like 3 weeks, and while all this was happening, and I was unable to respond. I was so mad, but also in so much pain, just physically, and I couldn't articulate what I was feeling throughout the recovery process, and I was just so angry and so lost, didn't know what to do, and so. When I got out of the hospital, I started joining different professional development sessions that were centered around virtual learning, like preparing for the next school year, but also these elements of race came into play. And so I'm at these virtual sessions, and people start throwing out the term cultural relevant teaching. And when people would ask the question, well, what is that? What does that mean? People weren't really able to answer the question. And these are music educators. These were people that were, leaders in their community in terms of being supervisors or, teachers that people looked up to. And I said to myself, like, well, what does this look like in music? Is there a framework? Where are there resources that people can go to figure out how to be culturally relevant? And what does it look like in music? And so I did a quick search. I didn't find anything. So I reached out to a few friends of mine from USC, another friend who I had a connection with, and several other people. I was like, hey, I want to do a research team. Want to try to find if there is a framework for culturally relevant teaching in music. What does it look like? And if there isn't one, what what would it look like? Should we do this?
Mhm.
And 4 friends joined me: Jason Vodica, Tina Nguyen, Christine D. Alexander, Lisa Crawford. They joined me, and we just started researching and writing and diving more into cultural relevance. And what we found was there were very few examples in music, but there were also many examples in general education.
Mhm.
So throughout the remainder of 2020 and early 2021, we did a deep dive. We researched, we looked at information from general education, from music education, and what we found was that there are people who wanted to do the work, but they didn't have a resource. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So we created the framework from the research and also from the nuances that come with this music teaching and learning.
Mhm.
And so that's how we got to the framework that we have now. And so that research was published, and we were able to get a grant to do a pilot study to see how it works with real live flesh and blood teachers who are in the classroom. And
Mhm.
that pilot study is going well. And so we just hope to continue to get get the framework out there, and to see what teachers need to make it work. Like, if you have a commitment to doing the work, we want to
Mhm.
help provide the resources for you to do it and continue to do it.
Yeah. And I love that part about, if you are ready to make that commitment, because what I have found in my work now all over the country and a little bit
Hmm.
internationally, mostly around our country though, what I have found is that I always ask people this. So if you've been to my session, you probably have heard me. I always ask the question, do you believe that music is for everyone? Everybody raises their hand, right? But then the
Hmm.
interesting thing always becomes like, in our actual application in our classrooms, we believe that music is for everyone. I have yet to encounter someone that has disagreed with me, a music educator who has disagreed with me on that. I gotta
Yeah.
clarify that. Not a music educator who's disagreed, but then in our actual application in our classrooms, the question becomes, what about the access for all of our kids, right? So are we
Hmm.
seeing all of the students that have a pathway to music, and not every student wants to study music, in a school setting, and that's fine. But the question is, do they have the pathway to be able to do it if they want to? And
Yeah.
what I find is that often we see like three kinds of students. We see the kids that are like us, very excited about music. They're going to do it regardless. The second kind is like kids who are like kind of in, kind of out, like they enjoy it, but they're also like, I don't know that I really see myself in the offerings that are there. And then the third kind we never actually see unless they have to, like, mandatory or
Right.
compulsory courses where they have to be, because they literally don't see the meaning or the relevance of music education. And that's really, I think, our fault as teachers, because it's our job to make it explicit why music education matters. And we do that through the everyday teaching that we do, right? When we are thinking specifically about
Hmm.
culturally responsive and relevant musical tasks, are we engaging kids in actual real world relevant tasks? Or are we kind of contriving like classroom only task, I call it, within our four walls of our music room? It's the only place where this kind of learning is going to make sense or matter. I think that really turns off a lot of our kids, because when we're only, reading a bunch of rhythms, or we're doing some kind of composer study that has no connection to like right now,
Right.
kids are like, well, why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And then that calls into like the practice that the teacher is doing, right? Are you
Yeah.
operating from your own frames of reference? Because regardless, you're being responsive to somebody's culture. Question is, whose culture are you being responsive to, right? So are you
Right.
responsive to your own frames of reference, your own culture, or are you self-reflective and self-aware enough to actually make space for those cultural frames of reference of your students? And
Hmm.
there's teachers, music teachers, for the most part, I think are on board. But to your point about there just needs to be a commitment to like resources and making sure that we have the support. I think that's like where we are right now, as far as like, do music teachers have what they actually need to put the things into practice? And as you have found, the answer was kind of no, right? Like there wasn't,
Yeah.
multi-responsive teaching as a field has been around since like the 70s. Music educators, like you said, are just kind of coming around in this last, decade or so. I would even argue in the last, what year is it? Like 3 years since 2020. I really feel like that is where all of a sudden we're seeing things. Maybe a little bit before, I think there was starting to be a movement around like um, removing problematic pieces, looking at festival lists and things. I think there was a little bit of that before 2020, but I would say
Hmm.
like definitely within these last, 3 years, I guess, which feels crazy, 3 years now. I feel like
Yeah.
now is the movement to really move forward. And I hope that the movement begins to really gain more momentum. I think one of the things keeping the momentum from really catching is this lack of resources, professional learning, coaching, and development around how do you actually implement it in your classroom and in your program beyond singing songs in different languages, which is not
Right.
responsible.
Right. And
Yeah.
also I think like these entry points or this the moment that we're in, more often than not is born out of tragedy. If we look back into 2020, we know what happened, two tragedies,
Mhm.
pandemic, and and the people have been killing unarmed people of color for what feels like a millennia at this point.
Yeah.
But we were gripped by it.
Mhm.
There was nothing else to watch on TV except for this thing unfold. And
Mhm.
so that became like the stopping point. So that was the two tragedies that, allowed for cultural relevance to kind of emerge in a real way into people's
Yeah.
consciousness. And then if you think about just the lens of social justice, that didn't really get attention until about 2015, 2016, when, NAFME went through their issues with their person on the board who made the comments that they made.
Yeah.
So, every time something egregious happens, then there comes this attention towards equity or this shift towards being anti-racist or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I think hopefully with this moment, with the work that both of us are doing, the podcast and all these other things, um, the moment doesn't have to keep being born from tragedy or
Yeah.
being born from egregious racist behavior. And
Yeah.
so that's my hope. And
Mhm.
with that, doing the framework, I think might have been a little naive to have a dream where like, well, if we educate people enough, if we create um, a space where students and teachers can develop cultural consciousness and competence, and be able to develop empathy through learning, then maybe people won't be killed because you're inherently afraid of darker skinned people.
Mhm.
Um, so that's that was the hope behind it, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point that sometimes the work, and I'm putting it in quotation marks, the work happens around either a tragedy like you mentioned, or just like a super egregious moment that happens. And then
Hmm.
sometimes what I notice is, like, for instance, I've coached teachers where there was a situation that happened. I'm there to help them through that situation. Often it's around like problematic repertoire choices, or maybe not communicating clearly why you're taking something out. Like, it's usually around like a programming kind of choice.
Yeah,
And then afterwards, it's like, I'm out. And then what happens afterwards? Right. And so the question is always, how do we sustain what's happening from
yeah,
time to time? And how do we move away from being reactive? Right. Some of this that I think we see a lot of times, especially in, I'm in those, I don't know if you are in some of those like Facebook groups where music teachers are talking about, everyday things that are happening. A lot of it is like reactionary. And
hmm,
I'm always thinking like, there are some things that could just be in place that are foundational parts of your program, your classroom, how you're
right,
running things, that would avoid some of these frustrations that are having. And I really think that, teachers everywhere are burned out, overwhelmed. And I
right,
think a major piece of that is because teachers are so often in this like reactionary mode. And part of that is the design of the system, right? The system keeps you so busy that you can't stop and think to question the
hmm,
system, right? So you're
right,
so busy doing all the things to keep going, and that's by design. And so I know that, and unfortunately, that's how it is. And the work that I am hoping to bring to more teachers, more schools, more districts is, how can we form a more sustainable pedagogical approach that does not require this hamster wheel kind of feeling all of the time? And I think a lot of it goes down to, are we so holding on like with white knuckles to what we want, what we believe, or are we willing to like let go? And sometimes when I work with teachers, that like when we get to that point where finally we can let go, now it's like, okay, it doesn't actually have to be so overwhelming and stressful, because actually when you just partner with kids and support them and more come from more of a facilitative lens versus a managing and I have to do everything, it's
Yeah.
actually a lot less stressful, I think. Of course, there's skill that has to be developed to be able to do that skillfully in a classroom, right? I don't want to dismiss that. But I think some of that, like once the letting go can start to happen, we see that it can be more of a partnership rather than the
Yeah.
teacher having to dictate everything. That dictation wears people out, quite honestly. And I think that
It
where
does.
culturally responsive approaches comes in is accepting that you don't know everything, nor does anyone expect you to. And in fact, it's better learning and teaching for your kids if you help them develop those learn to learn skills, right? It's really not
Right.
about diverse repertoire. It's about how are you supporting kids to actually think, be able to understand themselves, what's going on around them, people different from them, how the world works, right? And I
Yeah.
think that once teachers can start to reframe, and that's part of your framework and mine as well. Some of it just starts with those reframing shifts, right? Before we dive into other parts, I feel very strongly that we will start to see less overwhelmed, burned out music teachers, at least once we can really start to embrace a different approach for teaching, where we work more in partnership with our kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think teaching music in K-12, folks will tell you over and over again that your class does not matter.
Yeah.
Whether it's coming from administration, whether it's coming from parents and students, like, music doesn't matter. It's not a real class. And
Mhm.
so I think part of that is because of the way that um, we value music education, or the
Mhm.
way it's presented.
Yeah.
Um, if we're taking a more of a culturally based or a values based approach with the music that communities and families value, then folks will start to see that there is value in what it is that we're doing together.
Yeah.
Um, I've sat in so many so many parent teacher conferences. Like, how do you not have an A in music class? It's music. Well,
Mm.
no, we don't just do whatever it is that you did 20 years ago.
Mm.
We're talking about it. We're talking about it. We're presenting. We're doing all these different things, and so that's different for even parents to adjust to. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like my kid is able to show themselves, but because I may have told them that this class doesn't matter, they don't have to show themselves. So it's just in this situation.
Yeah.
But if we think about changing the narrative of how people in education at large view music and view arts,
Yeah.
it's through connection, and that piece becomes the cultural relevance. Like, how does this matter to me and who I am? Like, can I
Mhm.
see myself in this classroom? Can I bring my full self
Mhm.
to the classroom? And I'm in favor of all students bringing their full selves and bringing the music that you love. If we have the opportunity to play it, I just ask that there's little to no foul language in it, because I
Mhm.
wouldn't want my principal to walk in
Right.
and be like, "Oh, Dr. Palmer, we need to have a conversation about what it is that you're playing for
Right.
your students."
Mhm.
And, like, whatever won't get me fired. And, find a clean version, and I'm on board. I just don't want to get fired.
Right. Yeah. We gotta have our jobs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, like, the connection piece is important. And once students are able to bring themselves into the classroom, there's a lot more buy-in, and
Yeah.
you get to know who they are. And so they know that you're an ally for them, just beyond that 70 minutes that they spend in your class every other day.
Yeah. For sure. And I think also it's important to note that we can't really start to move kids, cognitively into these bigger understandings until they feel safe and that they belong in our classrooms, or
Hmm.
until they really see that inherent meaning, like you were saying before, in what we're doing. And I think a lot of that comes from teachers kind of skipping music teachers skipping the first step of, like, we're already so excited about music, like we don't need someone to like explicitly make the reason why we learn music or have a music class or band or choir or general music,
Right.
whatever the course might be. Like, we don't need someone to make that explicitly clear why it matters, because we're already excited to be here, be doing music. And we forget that actually, like, for your brain, you got to have meaning first. Just like adult, when I work with adult learners,
Hmm.
and when I work with kids too, which are actually not that different, I'm learning. But there always has to be like that buy-in piece, that making the contextual meaning piece, right? And I
Yeah.
think because we're already so excited about music, we forget that there was a time where somebody did make it clear for us. And we need to make sure that we start there at that place where it's connecting to our students. Because beyond that, what are we really doing, I think, in our classrooms instructionally? Are we just playing
Yeah.
songs? Are we just putting concerts on? Like, what kind of impact on really the lived experience of the lives of our kids is that making? There's so much opportunity as music educators for us to really dig into these bigger understandings and skills that will serve kids outside of the classroom. But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, I think those opportunities get missed because we are just so excited to get to the music part, and we forget that our kids don't have that connection piece. But it has to
Yeah.
be, that's the critical first phase, I guess you could say, not step, but the phase of how we really ensure that what we're doing is relevant and is responsive,
Right.
and it will matter. And I mean, when you think about like advocacy as well, because it's an unfortunate reality, right? I remember when I was in the classroom, as long as I wasn't doing anything where my principal had to like inconvenience himself, like they didn't care what I was doing over in the music room, right? And so, but sometimes was good, and sometimes was like, man, I wish they really were seeing this
Right.
great
Right.
learning that happened. Like my students were doing amazing things. And I taught elementary for a lot of the time that I taught. Like my elementary students were doing great stuff. Like I wish you were, paying more attention, but the reality is principals, assistant principals, school leaders, they have so many things on their plates. There are so many things that they're trying to figure out. Like
Mm-hmm.
they don't necessarily have time to worry about the music teacher because a
Right.
lot of times for us, like we're not like a state tested subject, right? I don't think that exists anywhere in music.
No.
Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I don't think there's a state test. Like there's no high stakes testing in music class. And we know that in a lot of cases, like that's where the focus of our school leaders has to be. So I get it, but it also doesn't, that doesn't, I think, help our efforts anymore. So it's on us to make sure that we're making it explicitly clear why what we're doing matters, not just for the kids that we have now, but for in 30 years when our students are the decision makers. Are they
Right.
going to look back on their experience in music and see how it mattered to their life, and be able to keep those music programs growing, thriving, well-funded music teachers have what they need? Or is it going to be easily cut when budgetary restrictions come in place because
Right.
they never experienced a music education K-12 where it mattered? They were just
And
playing songs, the teacher was playing the piano, and we were singing along. Yeah.
and art in general, all facets of art are taken for granted because they show up in every avenue of our lives.
Yeah.
We hear music in the grocery store. We hear it just being played outside some places.
Mm-hmm.
We can access it on our phone, videos, all those things. It's everywhere. We see architecture and design. We see, fashion is a form of art. We see visual art. We see structural art. So we take it for granted. So it's really on us to kind of bring it back and bring everybody's attention to the
Mm-hmm.
way that we experience music in everyday life, the way we experience art in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
And I think that will help make that connection for a lot of folks where they can find value in the time that they're spending in a music education space where we're taking a moment to take it in and then explore how these things came to be or how they fit together or don't fit together.
Yeah.
um, just generate conversation that way.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Awesome. So that brings me to my next question.
Okay.
I would love to hear, how do you define culturally responsive education in regards to music?
Yeah. There's a great quote by the GOAT, Gloria Ladson Billings, who coined the term culture relevant teaching.
Yeah.
She said that culturally relevant teaching in music is not a drop in moment, it's every lesson with every student every day. And so when I think about culturally relevant, responsive music teaching, I'm thinking about teaching that connects, teaching that helps students achieve more, that helps them connect to who they are on the inside and who their peers are on the left and right of them, even front and behind them.
Mhm.
Um, and then also that's allowing them to solve real world problems.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's an education that is empowering, an education that is asset based. Like, what musical experiences do you bring to the classroom? And then we start there.
Yeah.
And we just add more experiences. We're not trying to supplant any experience that a student has.
Mhm.
Because when a student comes to the school in fifth, or when they're 5 years old, they would have had 5 years of musical experiences
Yeah.
before they even meet a music teacher.
Mhm.
And it's not on us to tell them that those 5 years of experience don't mean anything, or that their continued at home and experiences in music
Mhm.
aren't valued or valid. We're here to bring something new and then empower them to share with us so we all can grow together.
Exactly. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And so I think one thing that other than the, just diversifying repertoire is not culturally responsive, I think that's the number one biggest misconception that teachers have
Yeah.
everywhere, especially music teachers, that we just think that that's it, check, I got it. I think
Hmm.
another critical piece that gets missed is this connection to actual like real world issues, real world music tasks. I love to know from the research that you've done, what have you found? I know you did the first phase and you're amongst the next phase now, but I
Yeah.
love to hear what have you found in regards to music teachers connecting to those like real world issues, real world tasks and context of music making. What have you found research wise as far as what that looks like for teachers, music
Yeah.
teachers?
In terms of, if we're talking about like that socio-political conscious piece, that social action piece,
Yeah,
teachers are scared.
yeah,
So that piece is not getting done, at all, because when someone says politics, they immediately think of the state house, Congress, the
hmm,
division that's in our country. That's, it's always been there.
hmm,
And so they're thinking about it, big P, capital letter politics, instead of thinking about it as small p, local, personal politics. And
hmm,
in the last couple of years, people have talked about identity politics. Well, everybody has an identity, and everybody's identity is sometimes connected to something political.
hmm,
So whether it's your skin tone, whether it's your gender expression, your physicality, hair color, eye color, all these things are political in some way. And so when I start to have conversations with teachers and PDs about this political action piece, they're
hmm,
like, well, what do we do? It's like, okay, well, there are small p local political things that we can talk about, that we can access.
hmm,
Um, and you could definitely do that through conversation. You could do it through a repertoire choice, but also with having conversation around that particular piece and what it means and those types of things. So it's not just a piece, there's conversation.
yeah,
And the example that I use all the time is, a few years ago, I took out Katy Perry's Firework for my orchestra.
hmm,
Um, and that is a pop tune. The lyrics are empowering. And
hmm,
I had an orchestra full of female identified girls and two male identified boys. And just them knowing that song and being able to play it, there was a light, something that was reinforced in them, like they are special, they can be empowered, they can
yeah,
take charge, and those things were important. So I use that as an example of, like, you can empower your students to love themselves,
hmm,
and people who love themselves are a huge threat to anybody who believes they don't deserve to be loved.
yeah,
So that self-love, that self-acceptance is such a huge thing for children to have. So if you have a song that can capture that, and you can have a conversation around what those lyrics mean while
hmm,
you're also developing a particular skill,
yeah,
that there you go. That's how you attack socio-political consciousness. Like,
yeah,
love yourself. Love yourself first, and then you don't have to really worry about who's talking about you, or
hmm,
or who's not loving you. As long as you love yourself, there you are.
yeah.
um and what was the second part of your question? My bad.
I forgot, but I feel like you answered what I was
Okay.
curious about, because I was curious about from your research that you've done, because I feel like we know that Dr. Latson Bills give us that very clear framework of
Mm-hmm.
we have to have clear academic outcomes for our students. We have to have cultural competence. And we can't forget that social political piece.
Right.
That's really what makes it, I think, culturally responsive and not just like a multicultural kind of diversity kind of
Exactly.
institution teaching. And I completely agree with you. Music teachers are definitely scared and they are nervous. And I think in areas of our country where some of these divisive concept laws are coming out and teachers are feeling too scared to even like test the waters and figure out like, well, how can I still give my students what I know is needed, is important, and and this law is happening, right? And I think there's a lots of ways where teachers are just being clear and creative, allows us to not have to worry about those laws so much. Because I think a lot of it is just they're so afraid that there's a law there that they don't even want to try. And I
Right.
think because so many of us never ourselves experienced a culturally responsive and relevant education where we were engaging in these kinds of conversations, where we're connecting our music concepts, skills, and techniques to real world context, I think it's really difficult to like, it's so like conceptual. It's not an abstract, it's not concrete for teachers to actually like, what does it mean to have a social political objective in my lesson, in my
Right.
unit plan? Like, what does that even look like? What does it mean? And so I'm really curious as I continue to meet teachers and talk with folks, what like the research is saying about like what teachers are. I mean, I suspect and I know, but I also am curious, like in your hard and fast, research,
Yeah.
like what are the things that you're seeing? And I totally agree with you. I think sometimes teachers overthink it and they get so
Yeah.
caught up with the capital P politics, and they get so caught up in thinking everything has to, I mean, a lot of things do kind of come down to race. We know that, it's baked into the literal
Right.
fabric of our country. And there's so many more things social politically beyond just racial kinds of stuff,
Yeah.
right? I
So
know in my
it Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off, but
Mhm.
as I was thinking like a Black History Month program is political. It
Yeah,
came from the need to celebrate the accomplishments of Black people in
yeah,
America. Same thing if you were having a Women's History Month program, if you were having an AAPI History Month, a Native American History Month, all these things were born out of politics. So we can wrap our heads around like a Heritage Month program. What
mhm,
other political piece exists, like environmental justice?
yeah,
What would a program look like where there was some kind of weather theme or environmental theme around every piece that was performed? And then program notes that talked about, climate, talking about using resources, reusing resources, and recycling. Was it maybe there's a recycling drive attached to that program, or
yeah,
the art teacher has students make a art out of found objects, and it's a you can have this very you know pointed conversation in a way that does not mean that you're taking your kids on a bus and you're going to Capitol Hill and you're wagging your finger at anybody, but
right,
you're just simply educating in a way that raises the consciousness, and creating the space for discourse.
yeah,
Um, if you were doing something like a concert, like how many people have seen a benefit concert around cancer, like raising money for someone? So,
yeah,
what does it mean to what theme would you have in that concert? Maybe
mhm,
there's a love theme where it's not so much romantic love, but it's just like love of humanity. Maybe
yeah,
there's something about meditation and wellness. Like there are ways to think about how to get these things across, and the repertoire is one thing. Like you might pick the repertoire based on your theme, but then you're having conversations, you're diving deeper, you're connecting it to the world that the students live in and the world the students experience, and
right,
then you're making connections to other things. you know so that's the piece. Like we can't just start with repertoire.
yeah,
Repertoire is the end result. Repertoire is 10 minutes at your spring concert,
mhm,
but up between January and June, while you're preparing for spring. I don't think people really spend that much time preparing for a spring concert.
mhm,
But, in between that time, what are you talking about? What connections are you helping your students make? What connections are they making on your own that you don't even know about?
right,
And what would it look like if the students were to create their own piece in that time,
mhm,
about environmental justice, if we're sticking with that theme? You know,
yeah,
I was I gave a project over virtual learning with BandLab, And I gave students chord progression. I told them, this is the drum beat I want you to do, but you can pick any nursery rhyme that you want to read over top of this, so they can get the sense of putting these things in a digital audio workspace. And I had a student completely unprompted. They added sound effects to their project. So they were reading Rain, Rain, Go Away, and they had thunder sounds and rain that was like on the window. And this came from a sixth grader. I didn't tell you to do that. They just did it on their own because they're the idea was sparked in them, and they brought it to me as like, this is what I can do. And so we have to create this space where that creativity is allowed to shine. And that they're able to share with us the things that they know, the things that they've learned, and we create community through that knowledge base.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I love that example that you just gave of the digital audio workstation, and allowing the space for kids to be. I mean, that what you just described was the artistic process, right? You gave them some inspiration, and then you allowed them to try some things out, make some revisions and things, and then that end product really was reflective of what that student had learned, and it didn't need to be one particular way. I think that was a really beautiful example of that. I love that. Yeah, and so I'd love to talk a little bit about, so your the second part of the study is happening now.
Yes.
Do you have any so I know it's in progress, but I'd love to hear, are there any like takeaways that you're starting to see, or any things that are trends that you're starting to see in the second part, where you're now having like applications with teachers and looking in their classroom?
I think the approach to cultural relevant teaching in music is sometimes left to the side by ensemble teachers, because like it's in the brain, but when it comes to doing it, it does feel like one more thing. And so it'll be interesting to see what resources or what supports ensemble teachers specifically need to feel that it can be empowered to reframe their pedagogy in this space while also doing the things needed in the ensemble. So like, ensembles, we're developing skills on the instruments, we're developing reading and things of that nature. So what would it look like to be culture-centered where skill development is concerned, as opposed to just skill-centered, and then letting culture kind of come if it does or if it doesn't. So what would cultural references look like if you're trying to teach a flute player to move from D to F, which is a huge jump, or D to C, which is also a huge jump on the fingering? So where can we find those types of things that can make a connection outside of the regular method book that we have? And so the other takeaway too is there has to be commitment. And I think everybody in our study has that level of commitment. And so as you're working through it, commitment to the ideal, and then commitment to the practice. And so working on that piece of, how do we support teachers in the classroom in real time with feeling confident and being able to do something.
And that's so interesting that you mentioned teachers feeling, music teachers feeling like it's one more thing adding on, like culturally responsive teaching. Because I feel often like I get that response when I'm, coming into a school district and working with the team that is like, oh, here's one more thing that I have to do. And I don't know if you notice this or if you're feeling this, but sometimes I feel like we said before, like culturally responsive teaching as a field is not a new thing. It's in fact many decades old. But I feel, I feel like with music teachers, I think again, because of that overwhelming hamster wheel kind of feeling, it can feel like this is one more new thing for us to have to do. And I think a lot of that, just the underlying part of that, comes from we have not ourselves a lot of times experienced a K-12 or college experience where we were learning music in a way that embraced real world contexts first, embrace cultural frames of reference first, and then fit in like the skills and the concepts and the elements. Because the skills and the concepts and elements will come naturally, is what I have found. Like if there's like sometimes the pushback I get is like, well, we're not going to cover all the standards. We're not going to cover all the things they need to know. And I'm like, actually, like that is, I have not experienced that myself. I have not experienced we're not able to cover a thing when I focused first on really the opposite way. Instead of me thinking I got to teach this rhythm, or I need to teach my flute players to transition from C to D. Instead, I'm thinking, how am I going to make a relevant musical connection and a relevant real world task for them? I have never experienced we were not able to learn new concepts, new techniques and things. And so the pushback, I think it just comes from a place of fear, really, a fear of having to do it in a new way, not necessarily having the guidance, ongoing guidance. How do I even think about making that environmental justice connection? Or with my own students, I did food justice connections because a program that we had in our school, it just made perfect sense. Well, why are we not? Can we explore this in a musical way? Why we even have this kind of program,
right?
Which was really relating to food justice and being in an area where we didn't have a lot of access to fresh foods and a lot of grocery store, a lot of fast food places and things like that. And so I think it can be really difficult for teachers to just think expansively and to think in this way, because I think the hard truth is that I don't know that a lot of us really ourselves have the discernment to really think about what are all these different connections. I think too many of us are kind of going, and this is the hard thing, but I'm going to say it. I think too many of us are just going through the motions of picking the standard, picking the thing, opening the method book, going to the next thing, instead of really thinking deeply about how am I going to move kids' learning and their skills forward so that when they go out in the world, they're prepared for whatever is out there that they're going to need to face. And through music, we have such an opportunity to be able to, music, I think this so naturally gives us all of these ways to connect. And I think it's hard work to try to turn the wheel, I think, away from this very traditional pick the concept, pick the method book, just teach the book way to no, you can be a little more creative and you can be more thoughtful about how you're preparing kids for the bigger picture of the life they're going to have to lead. Because the reality is most kids are not going to be professional musicians or music teachers. So if we're teaching all these notes and rhythms for most kids, or even for kids who are going to be professional musicians, because not all professional musicians read music and they're out here making millions of dollars, right? So we're only teaching these very uncontextualized things. What are we really doing? What agenda are we trying to advance, and what learnings are we really trying to advance with our kids if what we're teaching doesn't have a kind of connection? I think in that way, of course it probably feels like one more thing added to your plate, but I don't think that it has to. I think that it's that mindset shift and a reframing of what is even your goal, your purpose as a music teacher.
Right.
Is your purpose just to teach kids to read notes, or is your purpose for kids to be able to use music as a vehicle to connect and make really real world connections and context of understanding?
That's why I thought it was really important with the class I teach at UMBC was to start with the theoretical foundation, start with this conversation first. So, instead of starting with lesson planning or starting with standards or, making a transition from music student to music teacher, we're starting with social justice. Well, we started with social justice, anti-racism, cultural relevant responsive music teaching, and equity.
Yeah.
So what do all these things mean while you're preparing to learn how to write your curriculum?
Yeah.
When you're preparing to learn how to unpack standards, where does this fit in the discourse? And so we starting from there, and then if pre-service classes were starting from that place in every step of the way, by the time folks got through their junior year, they would have had their existential crisis. Oh my God, I'm learning something new. This is not something that I encountered, in K-12, when I decided I was going to be a music teacher. And so they have the opportunity to reset that and reframe that. And so when they go to student teach, hopefully they'll have a better sense of, this is how I'm going to bring this to the classroom. Even if the teacher they're spending time with isn't there yet, they could probably teach their teacher something about how to make this work. And so, there's a student in class who is currently teaching. And so we have a lot of conversations about how does this stuff work in practice, because, we have to admit that we teach the way we've been taught.
Yeah.
And if we haven't been taught through this particular lens, it's going to be harder for us to see through it and see how to get done. And so we just talk about it. And I don't mind the questions at all. Like, it's important to ask questions because they're really good questions. Like, he's teaching, he's in the classroom. And so these are going to be questions that someone, if I were to do a PD, that somebody's to teach for 20 years, they're going to ask these same questions. So it's good to just, they do.
Yeah.
And so, and to your point, like, when we talk about the day-to-day teaching, like, if we're going to do this, if we're going to, use this as a lens for teaching, then at some point we have to get really comfortable with saying, I am prepared to start from scratch. I'm prepared to I'm prepared for a new musical experience. As instrumentalists, I grew up in Prince George's County, and I went to schools of PGCPS, and then I taught in PGCPS for about 10 years. And as an instrumentalist, 7th grade, you go to festival, you do your winter concert, prepare for festival, spring concert, graduation.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat until 12th grade, but this time you're not playing at graduation because you're graduating. If you get a job in the county and you happen to teach secondary, you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. So you have the same musical experience over and over again that's centered around performance and assessment.
Yeah.
So, if you're going to commit to the work, you have to be willing to say, okay, where can I make space? What am I willing to set aside? What am I willing to try different? And that can be hard because it's going to be new, because we rely on the things that we know. So you're in uncharted territory, and that's okay. I think the other issue is convincing other people that it's okay to be in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And so that becomes the reframe, like, you being willing to commit to trying something new, trying something different, and then selling that idea to the people who are saying, no, you can't try anything different.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. You're not hurting anybody. At the end of the day, you're hoping to empower students. And how is that ever wrong?
Yeah.
So it's the buy-in from the self, but it's also the buy-in from your community that will allow you to have that strength and to go through that, to go that pathway alone. Because it's going to be hard. Everybody else is doing this one thing, but you decide to do something different, and that's going to be scary for other people but for other reasons. So we just got to be willing to try something new. And if you're going to try something new, you probably have to put something down to make space for that new thing to really do it with fidelity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so I think we've talked a lot about, and you've given some beautiful strategies and examples of how a music educator might put some of these culturally responsive approaches and more relevant tasks into the classroom. And so I like to talk about the opposite of that as we think about we're moving things forward. It's going very, very slowly in music education, but it is moving forward, right? It's like 1 mile an hour. I feel like I love highway speed would be great, but we're at like 1 mile an hour, I feel like, but I'll take anything over nothing at this point. But I love to talk about like the opposite. So we know that in music education, many of us are still teaching in a very traditional way. So at like the secondary level, very much like band director, choir director, orchestra director picking the music, deciding how the rehearsals are going to look. They're on the podium. Kids are sitting with their instruments. They're, directing the rehearsal. Rehearsal's over. They leave. That's it. There's festivals. There's adjudication. There's concerts. But it's like very traditional teacher-directed kind of teaching. Same thing in general music. K through 8. And oftentimes I think K through 8 teachers, I know I felt this way where early on in my teaching career, before I made these important shifts, it felt like I was doing like 7 concerts a day because I was essentially teaching in a very performative teacher directed way where I'm leading the kids through this exciting lesson, but it really wasn't a lesson because I was the one doing all of the work and I was just bringing them along with me. So it was kind of like the Miss Cuthbertson show, like 7 times every single day, which was super exhausting. But that's the way a lot of us are teaching, right? That's very traditional teacher focused way. Teacher decides, teacher leads, kids do. I would love to talk about what about the opposite of that? So the implications of us not moving towards a more equitable, culturally responsive, and relevant approach just being the mainstay in music education. What are your thoughts on like what are the implications for our music education future as a field if we don't start making these shifts?
Yeah, I think number one is alienating students.
Mm,
You know, school is for the majority of students, school is a liminal space. It's a place they spend time between when their parents told them they had to leave the house and come when it's the appropriate time for them to come back.
yeah.
So they're, they most kids don't want to be here. If they are in school, it's because they want to see their friends.
Mm,
So the class is also just something that they do, that they go to so they don't have to get in trouble. There are also other kids that are completely and totally fine with not going to class and taking their chances walking the halls.
yeah.
Okay. But I think you want to create a place where students want to be. And
Mm,
if you don't find a way to connect with students, to bring their lived experiences into the classroom, allowing them to show up as themselves,
mm,
even if who they are is disruptive, um, then we run the risk of just alienating them even further.
mm,
Like, give them a reason for wanting to be there,
mm,
and that can be hard. That
yeah.
can be hard. Like there are some classes that work well with it. There are some classes that are willing to give it a shot because they see you trying.
Mhm,
And then there are some students that are have already been disenchanted by education,
yeah.
for a variety of reasons, and so they're not really into it.
Yeah.
And so part of that is hearing that, seeing that, and maybe that's a one-on-one conversation. Like, well, I know you don't want to be here, but you have to be here. How can we make this work?
Yeah.
And then finding out from there, like what they're, what they need from you as their teacher in that space. Um, Instead of it being teacher directed, you can reach out to students in that way, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's hard, and it's not
Yeah.
going to work 100% of the time. Sometimes it only works 10% of the time,
Yeah.
but the effort has to be there.
For sure.
Um, and it can be brutal,
Hmm.
but find your community of music teachers or just general educators in your school,
Yeah.
commiserate, and then do it again the next day.
Yeah.
I think also, if we eliminate the socially just practices from music altogether, we will always have a situation where the most privileged students, and the teachers with the most privileged backgrounds will
Hmm.
always get the most shine.
Yeah.
I saw a video from Maryland Music Educators Association's Junior All State Orchestra, and these are kids that are performing, very top of their game. But by and large, those are students that typically come from wealthier school districts, or have a little bit more access to some things, some outside resources. And so, if we don't look at how students become to be in honors groups, and then work towards supplementing those extra resources that students from different counties have, or students from wealthier districts or wealthier cities within our own school district
Yeah.
have, then we leave students out.
Hmm.
And we know what it means when there's a top performing group. That group will always get the shine.
Yeah.
They'll get more opportunities to get paid to go play something, so they'll be able to get more stuff because they're good.
Hmm.
It's just a never ending cycle. So the group that doesn't have a lot, that has to overcome so much just to
Yeah.
be in the place, they're overlooked.
Yeah.
And so we have to start looking at all of our students and looking towards equitable practices. Like, what do you need to be successful?
Hmm.
What things does this family, this school, the student have to overcome just to be in rehearsal?
Yeah.
And then seeing that and acknowledging that, and showing appreciation to the family and student, and then also putting something in place so their struggles don't go unnoticed and unacknowledged.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And
and oh yeah, go ahead.
we also have to stop with repertoire first. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
like cultural relevance isn't just repertoire.
yeah.
Like that's a small piece of it. But the
Mhm.
repertoire has to connect. You got to make sure that you're playing it with, appropriate nuance and style. Is it repertoire that was supposed to be notated, or is it supposed to be from an oral tradition?
Yeah, yeah,
Does it make sense to be performed in whatever setting you're going to perform it in?
right.
And did you do your homework with that piece?
Mhm.
Um, and if you didn't, do you need to play it? Like
Yeah,
it's just that simple. Like it's in-depth score study, and any conductor knows you got to study the score. And so we have to study the score and be able to make those connections around it.
yeah. And studying not just the notes of the score, but also studying the purpose of the score, the
Hmm.
composer of the score, what is the context of this music that they've created. I think that there's a more expansive way to be score studying as
Yeah,
well.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that there's so much more to it than I think just the diverse choices or even just focusing on teaching the notes, on the page. And I think when I think about the future of our field of music education, what concerns me most about not moving towards a more equitable approach across how we deliver our instruction in our programs, or even just how we set up our programs in the first place, is I think what we have seen from the advent of the pandemic is um, a lot of our secondary programs especially were hit really hard numbers wise, right? So it
Hmm.
was hard to have a band and be on Zoom, and that was the unfortunate um, another unfortunate, I think, like byproduct of the pandemic was that a lot of what was being kind of built up in some programs. I know for me, like I was doing a lot of work with my own, programs at my school, and then the pandemic happened, and we lost a lot of
Yeah.
momentum, and that was hard. And I think that the pandemic like really put a bright light on so many of the cracks that have always been there, and because students for a while had the opportunity, not the opportunity, they always had the opportunity, they always had the choice, but they saw more clearly that no, I really don't have to be here if I don't want to. I don't really have to make this choice to be in this group if I don't want to. And
Right.
I think as we are like kind of not quite out of the pandemic, but like sort of on the tail, who knows what this weird time is that we're in, because the pandemic is certainly not over, but this like weird time where we're coming back to some sort of semblance of like being all together with our kids and getting programs back on their feet. We're starting to see programs are having a hard time attracting kids and getting them come back. And I think as I, look to the future of music education, and I continue to see a lot of programs holding on really tight to these very traditional ways of teaching, quite frankly, inequitable ways of setting up their music programs that weren't working for kids before the pandemic, and they certainly aren't working for kids in this weird kind of time that we're in now.
Yeah.
I worry that will we even have music programs in the future to be teaching? Are we even going to have people who have gone through a K-12 education who now are choosing to be music teachers? Are they going to see a reason why they should even be teaching music? I think that's what I'm one of the things I'm most concerned about not moving towards a more equitable approach, because the fact of the matter is, times are always going to change and times are always going to push forward. But if
Right.
music education still continues to stand in like 1865, which in some cases I feel like that's where programs are, like it's only going to be more difficult to attract kids, to engage the kids who are in the programs, and then to retain kids over time, right? There are some kids that will never be in our programs because they just don't see the relevance. And I think we're starting to see, as now that there's some of the bigger barriers that the pandemic, created, like having to be on Zoom and trying to do a choir rehearsal, we're starting to see really like the data is showing like kids are not necessarily wanting to continue to do our traditional stuff. And they have in fact found other ways to engage in music outside of school where they
Right.
are gaining relevance, they're gaining meaning, they're seeing the purpose, but we're not making that connection in school. So I worry, are we even going to have programs? Are we going to have a field if we don't make these changes in these shifts? I think that's like the one of the bigger stakes that we have at stake, if that makes any sense to say,
Yeah.
is will we even have a field in 30, 40, 50 years if we continue to stay stuck in time?
Yeah, for sure. That's real.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, yeah, and so I hope that from the research that you're doing, from the work that many people are doing, myself included, that more teachers will start to see that there is a way forward. There's a stronger, more sustainable way forward. And we just need to embrace. We just need to embrace, and like you said, put some things down, make some space for some other things as well. So awesome. This was like so good. We like went way over
Yeah.
time. I love it. We could keep going. But let's go ahead and start wrapping up for today. I wanted to leave some space for you, Liz, to share anything about any of the work that you're doing, any events. I think you have something coming up, and we'll be here in Maryland in April, right? For
Yes.
an event, if you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to work with University of Maryland, Baltimore County's music department, led by Music Education Division, led by Brian Kaufman. And we're working on a reimagining of large ensemble assessment, where we're actually focused on the creative process and allowing students to create music to demonstrate another type of musical fluency. So to demonstrate learning in a different way, aside from the traditional assessment that we've been doing for about 100 years at this point.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting. I'm looking forward to the two groups that will be there. We have a teaching artist that's coming to work with the students. I believe a teacher that's in Baltimore City, as well as teaches public school in Baltimore City, as well as an outreach program. I think Orchids, which is the outreach arm of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah.
And so this is such a nice opportunity to do something different, to see something different, to get to see kids perform in another way, or to shed that the insecurity of creation and putting yourself out there. So I'm really excited. That will take place on April 1st, Saturday, April 1st, at UMBC. So I'm just super excited to be a part of that and to be at home for just a weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am really excited for this to be like the first of many times that that's going to happen. And
Yes.
hopefully it'll catch fire, because I think another, when I think about bigger, picture music education things, one of the things that we keep doing for tradition's sake, but not really for kids' sake, I think, is adjudicating at festivals, right? And I think this is such a beautiful way to reimagine how that could look. And the question, I think, is going to be, because I know it's going to be dope, I know it's going to be awesome and successful. The question is going to be, who is going to be brave enough to start to do that in their school district,
right,
instead of traditional adjudicated festivals. Like that's what I'm curious is going to happen, because I think this is really, people are saying, well, if we don't adjudicate, then what do we do? Well, I think this is a beautiful example. So the question will be, who's going to be, so out there, if you're listening, that's my what I pose to you, who's going to be brave enough to start to really put some action behind these changes that we know that we need to make, so that kids can really experience the creativity of music, and not this like scary, competitive, decontextualized concert, people looking at you great, like talking at a record, like that's not real. That's not real music, right?
Right.
So I love that you all are coming together to do that.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I hope that there are folks who will be able to come look at and see what we're trying to do, or just first go at something different and something new. Through the process of all the research, we learned that festivals have been around for 100 years, and actually 100, maybe 120 at this point, and they haven't really changed much in terms of how they go. And so no one's saying do away with assessment. We're just saying expand what is being assessed.
Yeah.
Because there's more than one way to be fluent in music.
Exactly. For sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Liz. This was such a great conversation. Thank you again for coming and chatting with me on this show. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening in tonight. I hope you were catching all those gems that Liz was throwing, because there were a lot of them. And thank you for listening in. If you have not yet, make sure that you click that subscribe button on my YouTube channel and follow me on your favorite social media platform. I'm in pretty much all of the places. And be sure to share this episode with a music educator that needs to hear this message. So the best way to keep up with me and the work that I'm doing with music educators, to support them, is to be on my email list. So if you're not already, make sure you get on that email list. I send these episodes every week, as long as my articles that I write. and my Friday morning weekly notes email newsletter that goes out with my curated resources. So make sure that you're on that list. You can join by going to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. So thank you again to tonight's guest, Dr. Liz Palmer, and everyone out there for listening. I will see you again next time on the Music Equity Chat Show.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for having me, Ashley.
For sure. Thank you.